Beyond Reason Radio.
What is this malarkey? What is this malarkey going on in D.C. for the past couple of days? A lot of people are trashing Joe Biden for having the No Malarkey tour. I still contest that malarkey is a very underappreciated word. I mean, what? Malarkey. We need to bring that back into the lexicon, the common lexicon. Our friend Dana Summers had a comic out. He draws political comics, and he had a comic about Joe Biden, and it has him next to one of his advisors and says, Joe's focus groups say the word malarkey is an old man term. So he puts up a sign that says, say Balderdash and fiddlesticks to Trump. Balderdash, that's a good one too. Malarkey and Balderdash. There's been a lot of both of those things going on. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. We are on till 8 p.m. tonight right here on News Radio WFLA Orlando. We're going to talk about impeachment, of course. That was the big news of the week. We're going to talk about what I'm calling the cold civil war. I think I've called it the social civil war in this country before, but I actually think a cold civil war is really what it is in America. I'm going to tell you why it's happening, why it's a cold one, not a hot one for the most part, and what's the solution. So we'll get into that in a moment, and then we have to talk about John Morgan pushing for $15 an hour minimum wage in the state of Florida, and why that really is beyond reason. So a lot to get to, Tom Benson.
That's right. If you've are looking for shenanigans, you found the place.
None of this poppycock going on here right now on Beyond Reason. So first we have to, can you get the first cut ready up there,
Sure.
Tom Benson, of Adam Schiff? You remember right before the impeachment when Adam Schiff said this?
Invitation to Russia to intervene, but then most pernicious, his use of his office, his abuse of his power to attempt to get an ally to help him cheat in the next election, sacrificing our national security, undermining the integrity of our elections. We think that abuse of power most accurately characterizes the sweep of the president's misconduct.
Okay, so that was a lot of balderdash. But another thing that's happened this week is we heard for weeks and weeks, well, not really weeks and weeks, the past couple weeks, we have to get this impeachment done. Got to do it now. Why? What's the rush, Nancy and Adam? What's the rush? Why do this now? Because he's going to interrupt the next election. We got to get him out of office before he does that.
He's going to cheat.
Yeah, they're saying he's going to cheat. So you would think then that if this needs to be done quickly, that right after they impeached him, they would want the Senate trial. They would want to do this quickly because he's got to be kicked out of office. But no, the opposite's happening. They're not even sending over the articles of impeachment to the Senate. In fact, there's talk now that they might never send them to the Senate. Then what was the rush? Oh, that's because the Senate's obstructing and blah, blah, blah. But you knew that ahead of time. You knew that before the impeachment. You still said it had to be rushed. If you knew that you were not going to be able to send the articles of impeachment to the Senate, why didn't you wait for the judges to rule on the subpoenas so you could get more of the witnesses to make your case? We all knew what the Senate was going to do ahead of time. So what is going on here? I think what's going on is exactly what I said in the beginning. Remember, one of my predictions was that they wouldn't actually go through with the impeachment. I was wrong. Obviously, they did. But I think I was only half wrong. Because if you're not going to send the articles of impeachment to the Senate, isn't that kind of the same thing? Isn't that kind of not really going through with it in a way? I mean, they went through the vote, but you're not done. You're not sending it. So technically, the impeachment isn't even, legit yet. How does this work? They want it both ways. This just proves how partisan this is, how political this is. They want to make Trump look bad so they can use it against him in the next election.
It ain't going to work.
No, I think it's actually having the opposite effect. Because most people out there see what's going on, and they're like, why don't we just kick him out of office if we don't like him? I'm telling you, a lot of people I talk to, they're like, haven't they been trying to do this for 3 years now? Mm-hmm. Yes, they have. This was the latest thing. It's ridiculous. No, I want to play some voices of reason here on the impeachment stuff. First, I actually played this on Monday, but these were the two best points I heard. Rand Paul was talking about why Trump has the authority to do what he did in his call with the Ukraine president and his dealings with Ukraine. He's right. You can believe the worst motivations of Trump all you want, but he's still president and he still has the authority to do certain things. And Rand Paul's right. Here's what he said.
If I'm the Republican sheriff here and my Democrat opponent's son is caught stealing from a liquor store, am I supposed to say, oh, I'm allowed to investigate corruption unless that person is related to someone that might run against me? So you can't make rules that way. It's either corruption or it's not corruption. It happens that in this case, there were allegations of corruption, and they involved Joe Biden and his son. And the American people, when they hear that Hunter Biden made $50,000 a month, they smell corruption. I think it was wrong, and I think he used his office to enrich his son, and I think most Americans agree with us. But you keep saying that the president said, investigate my rival.
He said investigate Joe Biden.
Corruption.
He said investigate Joe. The word corruption does not appear in that transcript, sir. The word corruption does not. He said investigate Joe and Hunter Biden.
Actually, he did not. I'm going to go through the transcript because he actually did not say investigate Joe Biden. That's not in the transcript, believe it or not. He did say look into the Hunter Biden thing and why the prosecutor was fired, but he didn't say specifically go investigate Joe Biden. We're going to go through the transcript, but what Rand Paul's saying there makes a lot of sense. What he's saying there is, look, just because he's Trump's political rival doesn't mean that the corruption isn't there and that the president doesn't have a right to want to look into it. If Hunter Biden or Joe Biden committed murder, does that mean Trump can't look into it because, well, he's a political opponent? Because they're basing this off the motivations, is what is my point here. The reason why the Democrats want to impeach him, they say, is that, well, his motivations were to cheat in the next election. Well, you can believe his motivations all you want, but you can't actually have proof of that unless you get into his mind. So if you don't like Trump's motivations on a lot of things, if you believe he has bad motivations on a lot of things, there's a remedy for that. It's called an election. That's why we have elections. If you believe the worst about someone, you can vote him out. But if you're actually going to impeach, you need more proof of an actual crime.
He's going to cheat, though. That's why they can't let it get to 2020. And then that's going to be their excuse when they lose in November.
Exactly.
He cheated.
Right.
We got to investigate this and start all over again.
It's illegitimate. Yeah. Now, Ted Cruz was also on the Sunday shows. He was on ABC this week, and he made a similar point to Rand Paul. He's right. Here it is.
I think it is perfectly within the authority of the president to investigate corruption and to investigate corruption with allies. We're doing it every day. And by the way, we did it every day under Barack Obama, under Bill Clinton, under George W. Bush. The U.S. Justice Department cooperates with the Justice Departments. You know, when I was at DOJ, I flew to Rome to meet with the Council of Europe, to meet with Justice Departments all throughout Europe, focusing on cybercrime. That's a big part of how you enforce the law. Now, I'm not suggesting that you can cook up fraudulent attacks on your opponents. This would be a very different allegation if someone was saying, if the president had said, please concoct something that isn't real, that would be qualitatively different.
He's right. He didn't go over there and said, dig up some fake dirt on Joe Biden. Actually, that was fusing GPS with the Steele dossier that they dug up fake dirt. But that's a different story.
That's right.
But he didn't say go dig up fake dirt. He was responding to stories he saw from Rudy Giuliani and other places that he believed were legitimate, and he asked Ukraine to look into it because he believed it looked bad. Now, you can believe that Trump's motivations were purely political. Then you vote him out if you believe the worst of Trump. But he still has the authority of President of the United States to do those things. That's why it's not an abuse of power. Now, I thought I'd go through some of the transcript here because we haven't done this a while with this call with Ukraine to see what this is. So I don't want to go through all of it, but there was part of it where he talks about they go back and forth. Yeah, you're nice, I'm nice. This is normal political.
I want you to come to Washington and sit in the Oval Office. And
now Trump makes a point here. Mm-hmm. He says much more than the European countries are doing. Oh, he says, I will say we do a lot for Ukraine. We spend a lot of effort and a lot of time, much more than European countries are doing, and they should be helping you more than they are. Germany does almost nothing for you. All they do is talk, and I think it's something that you should really ask them about. When I was speaking to Angela Merkel, she talks Ukraine, but she doesn't do anything. A lot of the European countries are the same way, so I think it's something you want to look at. But the United States has been very, very good to Ukraine. I wouldn't say that it's reciprocal necessarily because things are happening that are not good. When he says things are happening that are not good, that's the corruption in Ukraine. Uh-huh. So Jake Tapper and I were like, oh, you never mentioned corruption. Well, he didn't say the word corruption, but when you say things are not good there, he's talking about corruption. Okay, so Jake Tapper's, an idiot. But he says, I wouldn't say that's reciprocal necessarily because things are happening that are not good, but the United States has been very, very good to Ukraine. Now, Zelensky responds and says, you are absolutely right, not only 100%, but actually 1,000%. And I can tell you the following. I did talk with Angela Merkel, and I did meet with her. I also talked with Macron. They are not enforcing the sanctions. They are working as much as they should work for Ukraine, yada, yada, yada. But he says, I'm thankful to the United States and blah, blah, blah. But the whole European thing, that's typical Trump. He has always felt like the Europeans have not stepped up with a lot of this stuff. And he wants them to step up more. And that's why he's reluctant to give aid to other countries. So that's already part of the conversation here. So there's a motivation right there for Trump to withhold some aid, is the European thing. Now, the Ukraine president continues, and he says, I would also like to thank you for your great support in the area of defense. We are ready to continue to cooperate for the next step. Specifically, we are almost ready to buy more javelins from the United States for defense purposes. Now, this is the part everyone says is bad. Trump says, I would like you to do us. Remember, he said us, not me, us a favor, though. Mm-hmm. Trump's right, because our country has been through a lot, and Ukraine knows a lot about it. So technically there is a quid pro quo there. He wants something for something. But the quid pro quo is not personal, because Trump mentions there that he's talking about us. The country has been through a lot, and we want you to do something. Now, you could say, oh, well, Trump's just using that. But like I said, if you believe the worst motivations, you can vote him out. He says, I would like you to find out what happened with the whole situation with Ukraine. They say crowd strike. Has nothing to do with Joe Biden, right? Has to do with the 2016 election. I guess you have one of your wealthy people, the server, they say Ukraine has it. There are a lot of things that went on. I think you're surrounding yourself with some of the same people. I would like to have the Attorney General call you or your people, and I'd like to get to the bottom of it. Now, I think the crowd strike thing is kind of a distraction. I kind of wish Trump wouldn't go down that rabbit hole. But the fact is, the Attorney General is still currently looking into the 2016 election and everything that happened there. So when he says to the Ukraine president, I want you to talk to the Attorney General about this, he's talking about a legitimate investigation by the Attorney General that's going on right now. So Trump has every right to ask for that favor. Because it's going on. It's not a personal political thing. Then Zelensky, in the next part, says, yes, it's very important for me in everything that you just mentioned earlier. For me as a president, it's very important that we are open for any future cooperation. And he mentions that they recalled their ambassador. They mentioned that they're going to have the best people around. So they're talking about the people in Ukraine and the people he's surrounding himself with. This is the context. I'm trying to give you context of everything. Then Trump said, good, because I heard you had a prosecutor who was very good, and he was shut down, and that's really unfair. So now he brings up that prosecutor that was looking into Burisma and Hunter Biden. It was already in the context of the conversation of corruption in Ukraine. And he says, a lot of people are talking about that, the way they shut a very good prosecutor down, and you have some very bad people involved. Giuliani's a respected man. By the way, Zelensky was the first one to bring up Giuliani, and Trump responded. And Zelensky responds and says, I wanted to tell you about the prosecutor. I'm knowledgeable about the situation. The new prosecutor will be good, blah, 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 blah. Then Trump says, this. I will have Mr. Giuliani give you a call, and I'm also going to have the Attorney General Barr call you. We'll get to the bottom of it. I'm sure you'll figure it out. I heard the prosecutor was treated very badly, blah, 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 blah. They conned it. And then I skipped the part I wanted to. Trump earlier said this. The other thing, there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution. So if you can look into it, it sounds horrible to me. This was a news story that was going on that Trump's responding to that was played all over the place of Biden admitting he stopped that prosecution. Trump believes that's unfair. And in the context of this conversation, it does seem unfair. It's all the same context about corruption. And Trump says, I want you to look into it because it seems like your prosecutor was treated unfairly. It's not about, I want you to investigate Biden. He says, I want you to look into the situation. And the point is, you can believe the worst of all of Trump's motivation. Well, this is all just to win an election. There's always some political motivations in something.
Name a politician who doesn't want to win his next election.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But the point is, when you look at the context of this, there's nothing there that is impeachable. He didn't say just dig up dirt on my political opponent. He didn't say I'm doing this to win the election. He actually didn't even say he was going to withhold aid forever. That came around later. But the point is, when you read the transcript, that's why Trump wants you to read it. We're going to continue this conversation in a moment. I'll try to be a voice of reason through all of this. I don't want to get too caught in the weeds, but we'll get through this and more. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you miss any of the show, you can download the Beyond Reason podcast on iTunes. The voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason is back now.
Welcome back to the show. I think I'm going to wrap up the impeachment debate thing here with just a couple of minutes here, and then we'll move on to other subjects. Basically, it boils down to this. Every time a Democrat, a leftist, a Trump critic talks to me about why he should be impeached, their argument is basically this. Trump used his office, abused his power to get foreign influence to investigate a political rival to cheat in the next election. That's what they're saying. But I just read for you a bunch of the transcript. When you look at the transcript and the evidence, here's the facts. One, he wasn't just looking into his political rival. He wanted to find out what happened in 2016. Now, why is that? Because there's actually a legitimate investigation going on, but also he's pissed because you accused him of collusion when he didn't collude. So he wants to find out how that started. So there's already evidence there beyond just what they're saying. Then in the conversation, in the transcript, he brings up corruption in Ukraine by saying there's a lot of bad things going on there. They talk about people surrounding the Ukraine president, and then he brings up the prosecutor in the context of that conversation, which brings him to Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. The reason why he brings them up is because there was evidence already going around that made Biden and Hunter look bad. He didn't make it up. It was already out there. I mean, I think Fox News was playing it and stuff. So these are legitimate things that are happening and that Trump is reacting to. You can't impeach a president for that. I'm sorry. They couldn't come up with a crime. That's why they had abuse of power and obstructing Congress, which are not crimes. Because there is no crime. All of this is about what you believe in your mind about Trump. That's all it is. The people that wanted him impeached believe that Trump is corrupt and that his only motivation was corruption in terms of his only motivation was his own political success. And if you believe that, he should be impeached. I've been saying that there's no actual proof of that because that's motivations. And so if you believe the worst motivations of someone, then you can vote him out of office. But you need more than your belief of his motivation to impeach him. That's the point I'm making. I think it's pretty, I'm obviously biased because I'm a conservative, But I'm not some ardent Trump supporter. I don't support everything Trump does. And I actually think Trump was wrong in one of his defenses. They kept saying there was no quid pro quo. Well, there's obviously some kind of quid pro quo because the aid was withheld and he wanted something in return. But quid pro quo, they're not always illegal. We do quid pro quos with foreign countries all the time. So you have to prove that it was an illegal, corrupt quid pro quo, and they haven't proven it. So you can't impeach him. So this goes to my next subject, which I'll get into in a minute. How are we so divided on this? What is the divide in this really all about? And it really has to do with the divide in the country as a whole. Why are we so divided? Why is there a cold civil war going on in this country right now? And the reason why I call it a cold civil war is because we're not, for the most part, we're not fighting each other in the streets. There's no armies marching or gun battles or anything like that against left and right, for the most part. I mean, obviously Antifa's out there and everything causing some problems, but for the most part, it's a cold civil war. It's a culture war. Why is this happening? And what's the solution to it? Well, I'll talk about that next. I'll be a voice of reason on all of this. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
If you heart Beyond Reason Radio, listen to the Beyond Reason Radio podcast on iHeartRadio. Just download the iHeartRadio app and search Beyond Reason Radio. This is Orlando's Smart Talk Radio. Beyond Reason Radio continues now.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. This is, like you said there, Orlando Smart Talk Radio. If you ever miss any of the show, by the way, you can catch the Beyond Reason podcast anywhere podcasts are available. The best way to get it is download the iHeartRadio app. But if you have any of the other podcast stuff on your phone, you can catch it there, iTunes, everywhere else as well. You can also like the Beyond Reason Radio Facebook page or follow me on Twitter at PMOWFLA, and then you can get into the debates with my Twitter trolls who just basically parrot the usual left lines, and I just don't care anymore because they're just annoying. So speaking of that, Tom Benson knows what I'm talking about with the trolls. So speaking of Twitter and all of that, I was thinking this week, and I hope this isn't too deep, but here we go. This country, I believe, is in a cold civil war. And what I mean by that is there's a war. I mean, it's a war of ideas, but it's a war that we're not, when we were with the Soviet Union, we were obviously in a battle with them over different things, but we weren't in a hot war where we had invading armies of one another. There were skirmishes on the side, and we see that now. We see that with Antifa, like I said, and some protests that get violent. And even these mass shooters, in a way, are kind of on the fringes sometimes of what's going on. And I'm thinking, because I'm like, why does the left hate Trump so much? Why do they hate him? Because they could have worked with him. That's what's so amazing. Trump is not an ideological conservative. If they had wanted to, they probably could have worked with him on things to get moderate stuff passed. But they couldn't do it. Why?
Because Hillary was going to win. Trump cheated and stole the election.
Well, I think that's a big part of it.
And the resistance was born on Inauguration Day.
But even why do they care so much that Trump won? And why do they care so much? Why does it affect your life so much who the president is?
Because they were waiting for the first female president.
I don't know if they really cared that much about that.
The feminazis were on the move.
I mean, they were out there. But, I was thinking of history when we had most conflict in this country's past between citizens, U.S. citizens, between one another. Obviously, the Civil War is the biggest example. But there's been times in this country's past where you had different factions who basically battled with each other in this country in different ways. Now, James Madison, he argued in the Federalist Papers and other places that in order to have a decent republic last long, you need to have a big country. so the factions could kind of balance each other out. That some people at the time thought democracies and republics would only work with small populations. He argued the opposite. You could have big populations, and that would actually, they would balance each other out, and there would be no one major faction overtaking the other. I believe the only reason that worked is because we were a big country. So if you didn't like what one group was doing, you could move to another state or something and live with people you agreed with. And most often than not, that's what happened. You had different religious groups living in different areas.
Birds of a feather flock together.
Different people living together, and they could coexist. And then you had the general national government for national security and stuff like that. But it didn't affect your everyday life. This is why local control in government is so important. We're so obsessed with what's going on nationally, when really we should be focused on what's going on locally, because that's where we can agree. But the times in our history where this didn't work were times when you had different factions all of a sudden living within the same space. So the reason why the South could get away with slavery for so long and the North, didn't have slavery and they didn't care they could coexist is because they were separate. But when they wanted to move into the Western territories, that's when it became a conflict. Because you had Northerners and Southerners with different beliefs about slavery all of a sudden living in the same area. So there was always a battle going on of, well, are these new territories going to be slavery or not? And that basically led to the Civil War. All of a sudden, those two things could not coexist anymore. The next time it happened in history, when the Industrial Revolution happened, and all of a sudden you had farmers from the Midwest and the South, industrialists from the North, and then immigrants from Europe all of a sudden converging in one area in some of the big cities with different religious beliefs, different ideas for government. All of a sudden they were living in the same area. And then you had, just watch the movie Gangs of New York. You had violent riots. You had all of that stuff. You had dislocation. It was caused a lot by technology. That was the other part where there was conflict in this country and people would have to learn to coexist. Then later on, the 60s. That was the other time when there was probably a lot of conflict between groups in this country. One of the reasons is because of drugs. Let's just face it, LSD was a powerful drug and made people crazy at the time. But what was the other thing that happened in the 60s? The advent of television. Television, all of a sudden, television made what was going on in the other side of the country or even the other side of the world a part of your daily life in your living room. So you could no longer ignore what the South was doing to blacks, for instance. That's why Martin Luther King was so successful in his civil rights thing, because he could go down and it was captured on television, and people in other parts of the country are like, holy crap, this is going on in America. We can't stand this. Same thing with Vietnam. All of a sudden, your average American could see what was going on in Vietnam and how brutal it was. And of course they were going to be against it. So you had all of these different factions now all converging through technology on your television set. So you had conflict. So why is it happening today? Well, it's happening today because, similar to television, you have so many different voices from so many different parts of the country or in the world converging on social media, converging on the internet. There was a time where you could have a political belief and say something you believed, and most of the time, unless you're in a newspaper sometimes, but you could say it, and you were surrounded by people who generally agreed with you for the most part, unless you actually were doing a debate. But now, if you're a big-time person and you say something and you post it online, not only do you have thousands of people you agree with that see it, but possibly thousands of people you disagree with see it. So you have all these different ideas, all these different types of people, all these different types of belief converging in one area on Twitter. And they don't want to coexist with each other. We were able to coexist because we were separate, but now we're all in the same area. And the reason why this has become a problem is because when you're talking about Twitter, one person says what they believe, and instead of saying live and let live, we have Twitter mobs that literally work to destroy your life. So you lose your job, you can't find a job, you can't keep your career, all of this stuff, to destroy you politically. So we can no longer live and let live because we've all these different beliefs have converged in one area. All these different factions now are trying to force their beliefs on the other faction.
Because everybody wants to win.
Yes, everybody wants to win. Everybody wants to be right. And instead of living and let live and being apart, we feel like we have to push those beliefs onto someone else because we're all in the same place on social media. That's why Twitter is such a mess. It's such a crap hole because this is what is happening constantly. We're pushing, so this is causing conflict. But the reason why it's a cold civil war, like I said, is because, look, it's all happening on social media. It kind of bleeds over into real life sometimes. But the only reason why we don't have a hot civil war in this country is because when we see each other in everyday life, you know, Tom Benson, if I saw you on the street or something, you don't have a big C for conservative on your chest. So I wouldn't know. I mean, I might be able to guess, but I wouldn't know you were conservative or liberal.
The scarlet letter, the big C, huh?
So we don't pay attention to that stuff when we're in public spaces because we don't know. We just kind of get along. There are similar laws and beliefs. We have similar culture we all have to believe in. But for the most part, we don't know. That all changes on Twitter, where all of a sudden you know everything about the person, and it drives you crazy that they don't believe what you believe. And these different factions that are competing for control and power and influence over the life of America believe they have to push it on you because it's tribalism, it's the groupthink. That's why I think we're in a cold civil war. It's basically a repeating of what has happened in the history of this country since the beginning. Different factions end up living together in the same space in some way, and then they fight over it because we just can't live and let live, like Tom Benson told me before the show. So what's the solution here? I don't have the perfect solution, but I will say this. I've always believed in the power of the individual. There's that famous line in the Men in Black movie, I wish I should have got the audio, I didn't, where Will Smith finds out. Have you seen the movie Men in Black with Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones years ago?
No, I have not. No.
You've got to see it. There's a part of the movie where Will Smith finds out about the aliens living among us, and he says, why don't you just tell people? And Tommy Lee Jones, been in the Men in Black, says, Will Smith says, why don't you tell people about the aliens? People are smart. And Tommy Lee Jones says, people aren't smart. People are panicky. They're angry, all this stuff, and you know it. But he said a person is smart. An individual can do something. And I think the only way we can get through this is if we realize that we're not just a part of a group, but that we are individuals and that we need to learn to think for ourselves as individuals. And it will take certain leaders, frankly, to stop joining the crowds and actually be leaders and put us in the right direction. Too many of our so-called leaders in Washington or in the media, they're not leaders. They're not individual thinkers. They're following the crowd because it gets them ratings and it gets them elected and it gets them money. Stop being a sheep. When our leaders stop being sheeps and people stop being sheeps and we actually think as individuals, then we can kind of move forward as a country. I don't know if that's possible, but that's what I think. Hope that made a lot of sense. I don't know. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I have to talk about the minimum wage in Florida next. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
It would be beyond reason not to listen to Yaffee on your TuneIn Radio app. Download the app today and search Beyond Reason Radio. The conscience in your ear telling you the difference between right and wrong. Yaffee is back on the air.
Welcome back. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I am your host, Michael Yaffee, this is the show where we talk faith, culture, and politics. We've been on since 7 p.m. If you missed any of the show so far, you can catch the podcast anywhere podcasts are available or on the Facebook Live feed. Just like us on Facebook at Beyond Reason Radio. So, I want to get into a little bit of something that's been big news here in the state of Florida, where I broadcast out of. John Morgan, attorney here in Florida, has been pushing for $15 minimum wage in Florida. Because of his initiative, it will now be on the ballot where gradually by 2026 we'll have $15 an hour minimum wage in the state of Florida if it passes. Has to get 60% of the vote. Now, my original concern was we're really going to start voting ourselves money. I mean, that's one reason I didn't like Andrew Yang, because he's like, I'm just going to give you money. And we're like, yay, voting ourselves. I mean, this is not a good trend. It's just not a good idea. There's a reason why we don't do that. We let the market figure those things out. But John Morgan spoke today on this, and I have to tell you why I disagree with him. Now, I'm not going to go into his motivations. A lot of people are very cynical about his motivations. I have no idea what his motivations are. I don't know why he would benefit personally from this. Maybe someone can inform me. It doesn't seem... it seems like he really believes in it. He's a liberal. He's a big government liberal. So, of course, he believes in it. He's always been that way. But he says a few things here that I feel are beyond reason, and I'll tell you why in a moment. Not that anyone cares. He's obviously way more influential than I am and ever will be, but you know. But he said this earlier today about his proposal for minimum wage.
If you got a better idea than my idea, do something. Put up or shut up. Unless you believe that it's fair that the minimum wage is going to go from this year $8.46 an hour to $8.56 an hour. A dime raise.
So he says something here that really annoys me, and it's not because he said everyone says this. But there's always this cry that we're victims, there's a crisis, and that means government has to do something. You know, if you don't like what I'm doing, well, then do something. You believe in doing nothing because there's such a crisis. Here's a thought. Maybe we should do nothing. Maybe doing something just makes things worse. Why should we do something? Why should the minimum wage go up any more than it is? Let's continue on. What's the next thing he said there, Tom Benson? There should be a few more cuts. You have the next cut? Go ahead and play it.
We have a great housing crisis. You read about all the time. You all report about it all the time. Housing crisis. Why do we have a housing crisis? Because people cannot afford to pay rent. People cannot afford to buy a house. That's the crisis. This fixes a lot of things. This fixes the housing crisis. Because now with a fair wage, people can rent an apartment or buy a house.
This doesn't fix that problem. But, I mean, I just kind of laughed a little bit because he said, we have a housing crisis. Why do we have a housing crisis? Because people can't afford houses. Thank you for that deep analysis there, John. That's like saying we have a crisis of poor people. Why do we have a crisis of poor people? Because people are poor. Thanks. Yes. No, the reason why we have a housing crisis, there's two reasons, actually. The main reason is because the economy is so good that everyone's moving here. And the supply is not meeting the demand. That's the biggest reason. The economy is good. People are moving here. They want to live here. So we're going to ruin the economy by having the minimum wage too high when the economy's good. It's silly. But the other thing is, it won't solve the problem. You know why? Because once they find out that the people that have to rent are making more because of the minimum wage, you know what they're going to do?
Raise the prices.
They're going to raise the price. Exactly. It doesn't solve the problem at all. But the other thing is, as well, is the other reason why we have a housing crisis is because interest rates are too low. You can blame the federal government for that, and Trump, honestly, has been pushing that. With interest rates are low, so to make... They can charge more, basically. They can get away with charging way too much because the interest rates are low. If the interest rates were higher, they wouldn't be able to get away with charging that much. It's just a fact. It's just how economics works. But the idea that we can just give people more money and then they'll just be able to buy more things, no, that's not how economics works. Otherwise, we could just give everyone $1 million. We'll all be rich and it'll be great. Yay! No, it's silly. There's no increase in productivity to match that increase in wage. So it doesn't work. He calls it demand-side economics. That's why demand-side economics doesn't work. Let's continue on with the next thing. He's trying to convince conservatives this is a conservative thing.
And by the way, this is a conservative act by me politically, and I'll tell you why. Because people right now have to make a decision. Do I work or not work? Do I go on government assistance and stay home, or do I get up and work? And when they do the math, they go, you know what? It really makes more sense for me to stay home and take the food stamps and to take the government handout and to take free whatever. The burden, that burden falls heavily on taxpayers. Who pays for the government assistance? Taxpayers do. So when I tell my conservative friends what I'm doing, I said, this is as conservative a political move as I can think of.
Have you ever thought about the fact that maybe the fact that it's so easy to get government assistance is why we have low wages? Is because the companies can get away with paying lower wages because they know those people can get on government assistance? Do you think those people are going to give up their free government assistance because they get paid $15 an hour?
I don't think so.
That's not going to make up for all the free stuff they get.
And if they are making more money, they may not qualify for some assistance.
Exactly. Here's a thought. Instead of choosing, well, do I have to get government assistance or $15 an hour minimum wage, how about they find another job that pays them more? How about they work their way up so they make more money in the long run? Oh, you're so insensitive. Okay. You're not a victim. John Morgan and people like him tried to make you seem like a victim, that the system is rigged in America against you, and that you can't do anything unless someone like John Morgan, with the help of big government, saves you. Maybe you can save yourself. And then he says something here that I think is pretty outrageous. Here it is.
Because the Chamber of Commerce likes the idea of slave labor. We had slave labor in this country once. Free labor, slave labor. And we liked slave labor so much that the country went to war over it. We went to war over it and killed each other, brothers fighting brothers, over keeping men and women slaved. Well, what I'm fixing to do is go to war on behalf of the working poor in Florida.
So all these people are slaves, Tom Benson. Did you know that?
Yes. Ugh.
That's silly. You know, Orlando Sentinel did this whole thing about people who work at Disney not making enough. Sometimes they have to sleep in their car. Of course, they show the picture of the person sleeping in their car. The fact that they have a car, they have a cell phone, they have new clothes to wear, all but they're slaves. It's all about treating you as a victim. So now he's convincing you you're a slave instead of encouraging you to better yourself. He's convincing you're a victim. This is how big government people always think. And that the only way they can save you is through big government. But a lot of times big government makes it worse because they screw up the economy, which causes mass unemployment. You want to talk about income inequality, you're going to have people not working and then people making too much. That's what causes inequality. The government getting in the way, propping up big business, so the little guy, the little entrepreneur can't get ahead. That's what creates income inequality. Why don't we let the market work? But now what we're going to do is raise it to $15 an hour so someone who's in high school who wants to work at a fast food restaurant just to get started, they're not going to be able to find a job. Who's going to pay a high schooler $15 an hour to flip a burger or to scoop ice cream? No one's going to do that. So you're going to have mass unemployment. And guess what? When we have mass unemployment, guess who's going to say they have to step in to fix all the problems for them? The socialist in big government. Oh, that's how it works. Very interesting. It really is just beyond reason. Appreciate you listening to the show today. It's been a lot of different topics. I am off for the next week. So everyone, I want you to have a Merry Christmas. And I'll be back for the new year, and we'll have a lot more stuff to get to. Thanks to Tom Benson, as always, for helping out tonight. And I'll see you guys next time.